I had one hand in the oven when the phone rang. 91 degrees in that kitchen. The box fan in the window pushed the heat from one side of the room to the other and called it work. I set the pan on the stove, wiped my palm down my apron, and answered without looking, because the only calls I ever got at that hour came from a scheduling desk at the Children's Hospital. "Is this Imogen?" The voice was young, not girl young. Young the way you are when you still think honesty is a favor you can do someone. "I'm dating your husband." I looked at the chicken. Skin gone gold, the way he liked it, the way I had made it 400 times. "Okay," I said. "I didn't know. Not at first." Ice moved in a glass on her end. "I lease apartments at Ashford Row. His unit came up for renewal Tuesday, and I pulled the file, and it's a corporate unit. His company holds it. He signed the lease himself as the regional manager. And on the emergency contact page it says spouse, and then it says your name and an address that isn't his." A breath. When I asked him, he laughed at me. He said, She stopped, started again, quieter, like the sentence embarrassed her. He said, "You're just the roommate who cooks." A drop of fat slid off the rack and hit the oven floor and hissed. Here is what I did not do. I did not cry. I did not ask her how long or how old she was or whether he took her to the place on Broad Street with the paper tablecloths. I did not tell her that the man she was describing had kissed the top of my head that morning and asked if I'd remembered to pick up his gray shirt. "Thank you for calling," I said. "That took something." She started to cry. They always do, when you don't. "Can I ask you one favor?" I said. "Tell him dinner's at 8. Then I hung up and set the phone face down on the counter, and I saw that my thumb had left a print of chicken fat on the screen. I wiped it with my sleeve. Then I wiped it again, though it was already gone. At 6:40, I drove the 12 minutes to my Aunt Corinne's, where my son had been sleeping on weeknights since March, because his father said he couldn't decompress with that noise in the house. Ellis was 6. He was on the porch with his shoes already on, because he had been watching the road. I signed to him, "Home tonight." He signed back, "Both nights?" I told him we'd see. At 7:50, I set the table for 3. 2 everyday plates, and in the third place the willow pattern one that had been my mother's. Blue bridge, blue birds, a chip on the rim older than I was. It had lived on the top shelf for 7 years. At 7:58, I opened the voice memo on my phone, pressed record, and slid it under the napkin at my elbow. In Ohio, only one person in a conversation has to agree to that. I had looked it up. Twice. At 8 sharp, because he was a salesman, and 8 sharp was a thing he believed about himself, Grant came in through the side door with his keys already in his fist and a smirk he'd been carrying since the driveway. Then he saw the third plate. Then he saw who was sitting behind it. Our son had his hands folded on the table the way I'd taught him, thumbs tucked, waiting. Grant's smirk didn't fall. It moved. It turned into a working shape, the one he used on the phone with a customer who'd caught an error on an invoice. "He's supposed to be at Corinne's. He lives here. We agreed. You agreed." He set his keys on the counter one at a time, like each one was a point he was making. Then he turned, and this is the part I need you to hold on to, because the whole man is inside this one movement. He turned so that he was facing Ellis when he said it. "You want to do this in front of him? Fine. You've had a free ride in this house for 7 years. You cook, you clean, you type your little insurance codes at my kitchen table, and you call that contributing." He spread his hands, palms up, reasonable. "Sloan knows exactly what you are. You're the woman who rents a room off me and feeds somebody else's kid." Somebody else's kid. He said it to a 6-year-old's face. In 6 years, he had never once bothered to learn that our son reads lips. Ellis's hands came apart. He put them in his lap under the table where I couldn't see them. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. And I want to be honest about why, because it was not strength. September 15th was 68 days away. That was the date on the surgical letter on the refrigerator, pinned under a magnet shaped like a slice of watermelon. Second implant, left ear, 7:40 arrival, A woman who screams in her own kitchen on a Thursday night gets a husband at a lawyer's office Friday morning, and a lawyer is a delay, and a delay is a surgery date that slides to spring, and spring is another year of my son watching mouths instead of hearing them. So I picked up the serving fork. I put a piece of chicken on Ellis's plate, and then on mine, and then on the Willow plate, which was also Ellis's, though Grant hadn't worked that part out yet. "Sit down," I said. "It's getting cold." And he sat. That's the thing I keep coming back to. He sat, and he ate, and he told us about a distributor in Springfield who didn't know how to read a spec sheet. At 8:40, his phone lit up on the table beside his glass, face up, the way he always left it, because he believed there was nothing on it I would ever think to look for. Third Federal, account alert. He turned it over with one finger without breaking his sentence. I looked at the fan and counted to 4. Folded twice in my apron pocket was a receipt from the records department at Third Federal on Stringtown Road, time-stamped 2:14 that afternoon. $11. Certified statements, 24 months. He had 25 days left of being right about me, and he spent the first one complaining about a spec sheet. Nobody scraped a chair. Nobody threw anything. The fan turned in the window, and the ice in Ellis's cup collapsed on itself with a small, wet sound, and my husband asked me to pass the salt, and I passed it. Later, after the dishes, I took the Willow plate to the sink and turned it over in my hands. There was a ring of dust on the underside from the top shelf, a perfect gray circle, 7 years thick. I ran my thumb through it and thought, I have been setting a place for a man who is never coming home. There is a Monday I need to tell you about before anything else, and the phone call he made from the parking lot of a steakhouse in Dublin, Ohio, with his card in his hand and a girl across the table, when a very polite woman at Third Federal told him that his card was on a verification hold and there was nothing she could do about it tonight. He came home at 10:15 and stood in the kitchen doorway with his tie loose. "Did you call the bank?" "About what?" "Somebody put a hold on the card." He was watching my face. "Signature verification. They wouldn't tell me who requested it." "That sounds like something they'd only tell an account holder," I said, and I turned the page of my crossword. He stood there another few seconds. Then he went upstairs, and I heard him on the phone in the bathroom with the fan running, which was new, and I sat at the table and did not fill in a single square. "My name is Imogen York. I'm 31. I code medical claims at a kitchen table in Grove City, Ohio, and if you'd asked me that week what I wanted, I'd have said 1 uninterrupted hour of quiet. If this is the kind of story you want to hear all the way to the end, stay with me. And if there's a plate in your house you've been setting for somebody who isn't coming, I'd like to hear about it later. That's all I'll ask you for. Because I need you to understand something before the rest of it. I didn't set that third place to be cruel. I set it because for 4 months my son had been eating dinner at his great-aunt's house, and I had finally understood that this was not about noise. So I have to go back 4 months, to March, to the night my husband first used that word, because that is where the counting started. In March, he came home from a regional meeting in Cleveland and stood in the doorway of Ellis's room while I was reading to him, and he said, "I can't do this every night. The noise." Ellis had turned 6 2 months before. He was signing along with the story, the way he did, both hands going. His processor turned up because he liked the shape of my voice, even when he couldn't catch all of it. That was the noise. A boy narrating a book about a raccoon to himself in a language his father had refused, for 5 years, to learn a single word of. I said we'd figure something out. By the end of that week, Ellis had a drawer at my Aunt Corinne's house. You want to know why I let that happen? I've asked myself in 100 different rooms since. Here is the honest answer. My father died in February of 2019 and left me the house on Larkspur Court, the one he framed himself in 1991, and I married Grant 4 months later in the backyard, under the maple, with 22 people and a rented tent. Ellis was born in January of 2020. He was jaundiced. The number climbed, and a discharge nurse wrote it down, and nobody called it back, and by the time anybody looked at that number again, my son could not hear a fire alarm. There was a settlement in November of 2021. $312,000, after the lawyers, into a trust for Ellis with the probate court watching over it, and me as the trustee, because that's how Ohio handles money that belongs to a child. The court set it up in two pieces: a restricted account holding $260,000, where nothing moves without a certified copy of an order signed by the probate court, and a disbursement account I drew from every month for therapy and equipment and gas. The restricted side wasn't mine to touch and wasn't supposed to move, so I watched the side that moved. It paid for the first implant in March of 2022. It was supposed to pay for the second one. The court's next biennial accounting was due from me in October of 2026, and I had the folder for it already started, because that is the kind of person I am. I learned 400 signs. I drove to Nationwide every Tuesday for 4 years. I coded claims from 9 at night until 2 in the morning because daytime belonged to therapy appointments, and I got very good at it, good enough that the practice manager once called me the reason her denial rate dropped, and I told nobody that, including Grant, because Grant had a way of hearing other people's good news as a personal comment. And I stayed, because a marriage is a set of small permissions, and I had given every one of them years before I noticed I was giving them. But in April, the trust statement stopped coming in the mail. I called twice. The first time, a woman told me the paperless setting had been switched on. The second time, she told me it had been switched on again. On the 9th of July, I drove to the records department on Stringtown Road and asked for certified copies of 36 months and paid $16 and put the receipt in my apron pocket. 3 hours later, a girl called to tell me I was the roommate who cooks. That is the order it happened in. I want that on the record, because later a man in a good suit tried very hard to suggest I invented all of it after I got my feelings hurt. The envelope came on the 13th, a Monday, with a green seal on the flap and a page stamped by an officer of the bank. I opened it at the kitchen table at 11 at night with the fan off because I wanted to be able to hear the house. 31 debits, all of them on the restricted side. Every line carried the same code: Trustee Distrib, cert copy court entry on file. And on the second page, in the account profile, under authorized signers, there were 2 names where there had always been one, and the second one had been added on the 4th of March 2024 on the strength of a document the bank had accepted as a certified copy of an order from Franklin County Probate Court. I have read every order that court has ever issued about my son. There is no such order. There never was. The first debit was March of 2024, $2,000. Then another. Then a pattern, once or twice a month, never enormous, never round enough to look invented. 3,100, 4,200, 1,800. In November of 2024, there was a wire for $41,000 to D. Whitlock, which is my mother-in-law, whose roof was replaced that winter and who took a cruise out of Galveston in February and brought me back a keychain. I got the spiral notebook I use for claim denials, and I wrote them all out by hand, and then I added them up twice because the first total did not seem like a real number. $196,400. I remember the sound the pen made. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I should feel something, and then feeling my own pulse in my ears instead, and then noticing that at some point I had started writing the dates in the same neat column I use for dates of service. Upstairs, the shower ran a long time. When it stopped, he called down to ask if there was any of the chicken left. On the second shelf, I said. I put the pages back in the envelope. I wrote 713 on the back of the bank receipt with the same pen, and I put both in the file box where I keep 6 years of explanation of benefits letters, which is a box nobody in that house had ever once opened, because nobody in that house had ever once believed there was anything in it. I didn't know it yet, but the last of those 31 withdrawals had a date on it that was going to matter far more than the amount. The hospital called on the 16th at 9:05. I was on hold with a payer in Indianapolis when the other line came up, and I dropped the payer, which I had never done in 6 years. Ms. York, this is Danielle from Surgical Financial Coordination. I'm calling about the September 15th authorization for Ellis. Yes. The pre-auth came back denied. Paper moving. It's not a medical necessity issue. The plan is saying he isn't listed. Isn't listed. He's not on the subscriber's policy as a dependent. According to what I'm seeing here, he hasn't been since January 1st of 2025. There is a specific silence that happens in your body when a fact arrives that your mind has no shelf for. The fan was going. Out the window, 2 doors down, somebody's sprinkler ticked around. That's an error, I said, because I code these for a living, and because I needed 30 seconds. I'll get you a corrected eligibility. Don't release the date. I can hold the room until the 28th of August, she said. After that, it goes back to the pool. I am the guarantor on every one of my son's accounts. That word has never mattered to me before that morning. I called the plan's member services and asked for the full enrollment history for the dependent, and the man on the other end read it to me in the flat voice of somebody reading a grocery list. Enrolled January 2020, continuous coverage. Terminated December 31, 2024, at open enrollment by dependent waiver. There's a signed waiver on file, he said. I can fax it to the guarantor of record. Before you do that, my voice came out level, which surprised me. What mailing address do you show for this member's correspondence? Keys, 4200 Ashford Row, Apartment 2B. For 19 months, every denial letter about my son's ears had gone to an apartment 9 miles from the room he slept in. I code claims for a living. I have explained the phrase explanation of benefits to strangers on the phone 400 times, and I had not seen a single one of my own child since New Year's Day of 2025, and I had never once wondered why, because the balances were always paid. Somebody had been paying them. Every month, on time, through a patient portal account I did not have the password to. With a card on file the front desk had stopped asking me about after the first year. I already knew which account the money came from. I had 31 lines of it in a spiral notebook in a file box. It came through the next afternoon on the little all-in-one printer on my desk. 1 page, curling as it fed. I hereby waive dependent medical, dental and vision coverage for the following dependent for the 2025 plan year. A checked box. A date, November 12, 2024. And at the bottom, on the signature line, my own name. It was not my handwriting. It was a decent try. The capital I was too tall and the G had a closed loop, and I have never in my life closed a G. Under it, in the notary block, a stamp, a commission number, an expiration date, and a signature I have seen on Christmas cards for 7 years. Bethany Whitlock Doss, my husband's sister. Notary Public, State of Ohio, employed by a title agency on Sawmill Road that requires its notaries to keep a bound journal, and who once told me at a christening that she'd never had a single line out of place in hers in 11 years. I sat with that page for a long time. Then I made a copy of it, and then I made 2 more, because that is the kind of thing you learn from 6 years of insurance. That Tuesday I drove Ellis to speech therapy like always, and for the first time in 4 years, I stopped at the front desk on the way out. The woman there is named Rochelle. She has 3 grandchildren and a coffee cup that says World's Okayest Receptionist, and she has checked us in 180 times. I need to look at the account, I said. She turned the monitor a little, the way they do when they've decided you're allowed. The balance was 0. It has always been 0. Under it, a payment history. 19 months of card payments, 1 a month, posted between the 28th and the 30th. That's through the portal, Rochelle said. Your husband set that up. He asked us to route the statements to the Ashford Row address. He said you weren't good with the financial side. 19 months, 19 denials I never saw. I have taken a denial for a bilateral processor upgrade and turned it into a paid claim in 9 days. Twice, for strangers, for a practice on Sawmill Road that sends me a fruit basket every December. Rochelle, I said, how many times has a claim on this account come back denied since January of last year? She scrolled. Her face changed on the way down. All of them, she said. I stood at that counter with my son's hand in mine, in a hallway with a mural of a whale on it, and understood that the one thing I am genuinely excellent at had been sitting 9 miles away in a locked mailbox for a year and a half, addressed to nobody. Can you print it? She printed it. She also, without being asked, wrote her cell number on the top page and said to call her if anybody ever needed her to say who set up the portal. And then she looked over my shoulder at the waiting room and said quietly that she had wondered. Everyone wondered. Nobody asks. That is the whole reason people like Grant get 29 clean months. On the way home, he was quiet in the back, watching the tree line, and then he tapped the window to get my eyes in the mirror. Is September still happening? He had been in the room in March when I told his father the date. He had been in the kitchen every time I said it on the phone. He had been reading our mouths for 5 years, while 2 adults talked over his head about the inside of his own skull. I signed back with one hand on the wheel at the light. Yes, that was the first lie I told my son, and I want to be very clear that I knew it when I told it. Bethany came by that Wednesday with a broccoli casserole nobody had asked for. She stood in my kitchen in her work clothes and told me she'd heard Grant and I were in a rough patch, and that men his age get strange around 40, and that the important thing was to keep the family from splitting, for Ellis. And did I know that a divorce would mean the boy's money would end up tied up in court for years? I had not said one word to her about a divorce. "Bethany," I said, "how many times have you notarized my signature?" She laughed. It came out in 2 pieces. Then she picked up her dish, the full one, and carried it back out to her car. On the 23rd, a Thursday, a man called my cell at 8 in the morning and asked whether 1030 worked for the interior. The interior of what? The appraisal. Papers. Larkspur Court? I've got the order here. Lender ordered, drive-by plus interior. He said you'd be home. Who said? Mr. Whitlock. He asked me to make sure I get pictures of the kitchen. A little laugh, friendly, a man who liked his job. He said his wife picked out the counters and I should make them look good. I stood in my father's kitchen, holding a cup of coffee, in front of the counters my father installed in 1996 and never let anyone talk him into replacing. And I remembered June. She'd come with him on a Saturday, the girl, though I hadn't known her name then. I'd been at Corinne's picking up Ellis, and I came home early, and there was a car in my driveway and 2 people in my kitchen with a tape measure, and Grant said she was from the countertop place. She had on a sundress and no clipboard. She was looking at the refrigerator, at Ellis's picture schedule, 3 squares, drawn in marker, laminated at the library, morning and afternoon. And a 3rd one he'd left blank since he was 4 because he liked to fill it in himself at dinner. Grant reached past her and turned it face down on the freezer door. "Landlady's kid," he said. "She's month to month." I remember the girl's face doing something small and confused, and I remember thinking she was rude for not saying hello, and I want you to understand how much of my life I spent being generous with the wrong people. 10:30 is fine, I told the appraiser. I let him in at 10:30, and I let him photograph my father's counters, and I offered him a glass of water, because there was no version of this where I let a stranger see anything on my face. At noon, I drove downtown to the recorder's office and paid $12 for 3 certified copies of the deed to 1418 Larkspur Court, and $8 more for 2 of the certificate of transfer out of my father's estate, filed February 2019, 4 months before my wedding. 1 owner. My name, my maiden name, my father's handwriting on the transfer schedule where he'd listed the parcel and written, in pencil in the margin, for Immy. An inherited house, titled to one spouse, never refinanced, never retitled, is that spouse's separate property in Ohio. I knew that the way you know a thing you have never once needed. So I called the lender's number off the appraisal order, and I said I was calling about a file on Larkspur Court. And a woman with a headset asked me for the last 4 of the applicant's social, and I gave it, because after 10 years, you know your husband's numbers better than your own. $95,000, home equity line, application and underwriting, closing scheduled for the 6th of August. 2 signatures on the intake package, both notarized. "Would you like me to note anything for the loan officer?" she asked. "No," I said, "thank you for your time." Some people find out their husband is stealing and feel the floor go. I felt the opposite. I felt the floor arrive. For 7 years I had been living in a house where every argument ended with me not being sure what was true. And now there was a closing date, and closing dates are true. That night he came home late and cheerful and told me the market was turning, and a man has to move when it turns. Big month, I said. August, he said, is going to be the best month of my life. I was more right about that than either of us knew, but not in the direction he meant, and not for him. The processor died the next day. Ellis had gone quiet at breakfast. Not his ordinary quiet, a different one, head tipped, hand going up to the side of his skull, the way it did when the sound got thin. By lunch, there was nothing coming through at all. The unit was dead, 4 years old, a year past warranty, and a model the manufacturer stopped making in 2024, which meant no loaner and no repair, only a replacement. I called the audiology desk. A replacement processor, out of pocket, is a little over $9,000. With coverage, it's a copay and 8 business days. I sat on the bathroom floor with the phone against my chest until my son came looking for me. I was 6. He had his blue case in his hand, the hard plastic one with the dinosaur sticker he chose himself at the gift shop the day of the first surgery. And he opened it and showed me the empty foam cutout where the processor lived at night. And he signed slowly, the way he did when he wanted to be sure I understood. Is it broken forever? That night at dinner, Grant put his fork down and said, to the room, in the direction of our son, honestly, I think you're the one who can't live with it. I asked him what he meant. He's fine. Look at him. He does great. He gestured with the fork. People lived whole lives without hearing, Imogen. Whole civilizations. You're the one who needs him fixed, so you have something to do with yourself. $9 grand. For what? So he can hear a lawnmower. Ellis was watching his mouth. He always watched his mouth. Then my son reached up with both hands, took off the dead processor he'd been wearing all day out of habit, laid it in the foam cutout, closed the blue case, and set it on the counter next to his father's keys. I didn't cry. He went upstairs and got his book about the raccoon and read it to himself with his back against the radiator. I did the dishes. I remember the water being too hot and not caring. I remember thinking about the word civilizations and about a man who had needed a word that big to make a small thing sound like philosophy. When the sink was empty, I dried my hands and wrote 3 things on the back of an envelope. Guardian, records order. Then I put the envelope in the file box with the rest of it, and I went upstairs and lay down next to him and did not sleep. And somewhere in there, the part of me that had spent 6 years asking whether I was being fair sat down and shut up. I wanted to think I was harmless. I decided to stay harmless for 10 more days. They came together on the 26th, a Sunday, which was how I knew it had been planned at his mother's table. Bethany brought her bag, the leather one she carried to closings, and she set it on the chair where nobody sits. And she took out a stamp and a journal and a document in a clear sleeve, and she laid all 3 on my kitchen table like a woman dealing cards she'd already looked at. Grant had his reasonable voice on. "Nobody wants this ugly," he said. "You're stretched thin. Anyone can see it. The boys' appointments, the coding, the house, you're running on fumes, and the court's got that accounting coming. And honestly, that's a lot of paperwork for someone who's been forgetting things." I had never forgotten anything in my life. That was the first time I understood that a story was being built about me somewhere I couldn't see. "It's a resignation," Bethany said in her closing table voice. "Trustee steps aside, names a successor, clean, family handling family." "And who's the successor?" Grant smiled at me. "Me." I looked at the page for a while, long enough that Bethany started to fill the silence with something about how the bank makes this so complicated now. Then I picked up her pen and signed my name, my real one, the tall I and the open G, and I slid it back across the table. "You'll want a copy for your file," I said. "Could I have one for mine?" Bethany looked at Grant. Grant shrugged like a man being asked for a napkin. She notarized it, stamped a second copy, tore the carbon, and handed it to me. I want to be exact here, because later this is the part people got wrong. I did not sign that page because I gave up. I signed it because I had spent 2 weeks reading about what happens when a trustee of a court-supervised minors' trust steps aside, and there is a thing that has to happen next, and it cannot be stopped once it starts, and it does not happen in a kitchen. He filed it the next morning, the 27th, with a cover letter and one attachment I didn't know about yet. A 2-paragraph evaluation letter, on letterhead, signed by a physician who had never met me. That afternoon, he texted me a photo of the stamped receipt from the clerk's window with 3 exclamation points. I put my phone face down on the table. Somewhere in a building on South High Street, a clerk was date-stamping a document that obliges a court to do 3 things, in a fixed order, whether or not the man who filed it has read past the first page. He had paid the filing fee himself, $42. Dorothy hosts on the last Wednesday of the month. She has done it since her husband died, and she does not accept regrets. I went. I want to be honest about that too. I went, and I sat under the new roof that a wire in November of 2024 had paid for, and I passed the rolls. Grant had the carbon copy of the resignation folded in his shirt pocket, and he took it out twice. "She's being very mature about it," he said to his sister, about me, while I was 3 feet away holding a serving spoon. "Once the court signs off, the whole thing's simplified, one decision maker." "That's all it ever needed," Dorothy said. "Too many hands." Bethany laughed at something that wasn't a joke and refilled her wine and did not look at me once during the entire meal, which is its own kind of confession. Dorothy touched my wrist on the way out. "You know, I've always thought you did a wonderful job with him," she said, "in the circumstances." Him was my son, who was in her house at that moment, sitting on the stairs with a book, because in 6 years she had learned the sign for cookie and nothing else. I said the roof looked nice. On the 1st of August, he booked Las Vegas. I know the exact figures because I have looked at that page more times than is good for a person. A hotel deposit, a flight for 2, and a charge at a jewelry counter in Easton, all 3 paid out of the personal account he had been feeding from the trust, all 3 dated after the 27th of July. After the day he walked into a courthouse and asked a judge to put him in charge of a disabled child's money. He told me about the trip on Saturday morning, in a good mood, with his shirt untucked. Work thing. Distributor conference. He was watching himself in the hall mirror. Back Wednesday. "Take a jacket," I said. "It's cold inside those places." He looked at me for a second like a man who has heard a noise in a house he's sure is empty. Then he decided he'd imagined it, because men like Grant always decide that. On Monday, the 3rd of August, at 4:40 in the afternoon, a bank did the least dramatic thing a bank can do. When a court-supervised minors' trust has a resignation and successor petition filed against it, the clerk's notice goes to the depository. And when a depository gets that notice, its trust operations department puts an administrative hold on distributions until a successor is appointed, because no bank on earth wants to be the one that let money walk out of a disabled child's account during a change of trustee. It isn't a judge's order, it's a checkbox in a back office in Cincinnati. It stopped the standing monthly transfer he had been living on, and the account it fed had $81 in it. Nobody calls the husband about it. The husband isn't a party. The husband is an applicant. He found out at 9:20 that night, Vegas time, in the lobby of a hotel with a curved marble desk, in front of a 24-year-old woman in a green dress. When the card came back, declined, and then came back, declined again, and then the young man at the desk asked, apologetically, whether he had another form of payment. I know the shape of it because he called me 9 times in 90 minutes, and because the 10th call was Sloan, who described the curved desk and the young man behind it like she was still standing there. "He's screaming at the concierge," she said. She sounded very young and very tired. "He told me you did this." "I didn't do anything," I said, and that was true. And it was also the most satisfying sentence of my adult life. The bank answers to the court. Ask him what he filed on the 27th. There was a long pause. "He has a son," she said. It wasn't a question. "There's a schedule on the refrigerator with 3 squares. His name is Ellis," I said. "He's 6. He's deaf in both ears, and he reads lips, which means he has understood every single thing your boyfriend has ever said in front of him." She hung up. I didn't blame her. He flew back a day early and slept in the basement and did not speak to me for 36 hours. And on Tuesday the 4th, he posted a photograph of himself on the back deck with a beer, taken from the yard on a timer, his phone propped on the grill with my father's maple in the frame. "King of the Castle. Single life is underrated. Location tagged, 148 Larkspur Court. 400 people saw it. One of them was a woman I went to high school with who works in the fraud unit at 3rd Federal and who did not do anything with it because she is a professional. It didn't matter. I already had what I needed. It just tells you what he was, that even while the ground was moving, he could not stop putting a flag in it. On Wednesday the 5th, he brought Sloane to the house. I want to be precise. She did not want to come. I could see it on her from the driveway. He walked her through the kitchen with his hand at the small of her back and told her the cabinets would go and the counters would go and that the window over the sink was coming out entirely. Then he turned to me in my father's kitchen and said, "You can stay till the 6th. After that, it's a construction zone. I'm not going to put you out on the street, Em. I'm not a monster." Ellis was at the table with a coloring book. He didn't look up. He didn't have to. He'd read all of it off the man's mouth the first time. I dried a glass and put it in the rack. "Thursday the 6th, I said. "I'll make a note." At 8:12 the next morning, Thursday the 6th of August, 3 things left my hands. A certified copy of the deed and the certificate of transfer out of my father's estate, plus a 2-page affidavit from the sole record owner of 1488 Larkspur Court, stating that she had never applied for, consented to, or signed anything in connection with a home equity line on that property, went by email and by courier to the lender's fraud desk. That was the first of the 3 things. A second copy went to the guardian ad litem the probate court had appointed for Ellis the day the resignation was filed, a woman named Alma Drager, who had left me a voicemail I had not returned until I had something to hand her. And a copy of the notarized dependent waiver, the one with the closed G, went nowhere yet. That one had a date on it, and the date wasn't the 6th. Grant's closing was at 10. He had told me twice that week that a man who closes on the 6th of August has won the year. He wore the blue tie. He took the good pen. The closing was at his sister's agency. Of course it was. Somebody inside had run the title work on a house neither of them owned, and somebody inside had decided not to read the vesting page. At 10:35, the loan officer's manager came into the conference room on Sawmill Road and asked to speak with him in the hall. I was not there. I have only ever had 2 accounts of it. In one he laughed. In the other, given at a hearing under oath by a title agency employee who was in the hallway, he said, "That's my house," 4 times, in a voice that got smaller each time. The lender withdrew the application at 10:52 and referred the file. That's language from the letter, referred the file. It means somebody at a bank looked at 2 notarized signatures and decided a human being should ask about them. He came home from that title office at 1:45 and searched my house. Not carefully. He went through the drawer in the hall table, and the desk in the spare room, and the nightstand on my side, and then the closet, and I stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel and watched a grown man pull a box of Christmas cards off a shelf and drop it. "Where is it?" he said. "Where's what?" "Whatever you gave them." He was breathing through his mouth. "You gave them something. They don't just stop a closing." "Grant, what would I have given them?" He looked at me then, really looked, for maybe the second time in 7 years, and I watched him arrive at the edge of the correct answer and then decline it, because the correct answer required him to have been wrong about me from the beginning, and there wasn't room in him for a renovation that size. I went out to the garage instead and turned over the bins with the Halloween decorations in them. The file box was on the chair in the corner of the kitchen where it had been since 2020. Cardboard, one of the ones the diaper cases come in, with EOB 2020, written on the end in marker in my handwriting, in a room he had walked through 4,000 times. He never opened it, not that afternoon, not once in 7 years. That is not cleverness on my part. I want to be honest with you about that. I did not hide anything. I put my whole life in a cardboard box in the middle of the room, and the man I married did not believe there was anything in it worth reading, and that belief is the only reason any of the rest of it worked. When he came in from the garage, his hands were dusty, and he had a splinter of pegboard in one palm. "You know I could have you removed from this house," he said. "Okay," I said, and I went back to the dishes, because there was no version of that sentence that was worth spending a word on, and because in a little over a day, a woman with reading glasses on a chain was going to knock on that door. Alma Drager came to the house on Friday the 7th at 4 in the afternoon. A guardian ad litem is not on anybody's side. That is the entire job. She is appointed by the court to be on the side of the child, which in practice means she sits in your living room and watches how you talk to him. She was maybe 60, with reading glasses on a chain and a canvas bag, and she asked me for a glass of water and then asked me nothing for a quarter of an hour while Ellis showed her his rocks. He signed. She waited for me to interpret, and then she started copying him, badly, laughing at herself, letting him correct her wrist. By minute 9, he had moved the whole tray of rocks over to her side of the coffee table, which in that house was a form of legal testimony. Then she asked to see whatever I had. I brought the file box. She took out the therapy invoices first, and the mileage logs, and the audiology reports, and the school district's early intervention letters, and the 24 months of certified statements with my handwriting down the margins. She stopped at the spiral notebook. "Who's been keeping these?" "I have." "For how long?" "Since he was 11 months old." She looked at the pages for a while, and then she took her glasses off and set them on her knee, and she said, "Ms. York, I have been doing this for 22 years, and I want you to hear me say something now instead of in a courtroom, because in a courtroom it will sound procedural." I waited. "Whatever happens with the money," she said, "you did not lose track of one single thing." I went and got her more water so I wouldn't have to answer. At the door, she put a card in my hand and said that she would be requesting the depository records, the notary journal, and the letterhead attached to the petition, and that she expected to have all 3 within the week. "One more thing." She stopped on the step. "The blank square on his schedule. He told me what he's saving it for." She did not tell me what he said. She is not on my side either. That is the whole job. The next morning, Saturday the 8th, my sister-in-law knocked on my door at 7 with her hair wet. Bethany had received a certified letter on Friday afternoon from the Ohio Secretary of State's office, notice of investigation, commission suspended pending outcome, and a demand for production of her notary journal for the period covering 36 months. She stood on my porch and told me she'd only done what family does. She said Grant brought her the pages and told her I'd signed at the kitchen table and she'd just been finishing the job. She said their mother had told her not to make a thing out of it, that it was all one family's money anyway. She said, "You have to tell them I was there. Just say I was there." "I can't do that," I said. "Imogen," her chin went, "it's 11 years. It's my whole license." "Bethany, every page you stamped moved money out of a 6-year-old's ear surgery." She went white in a way I have thought about since, because it was not the color of a woman who has been caught. It was the color of a woman who is doing the arithmetic for the first time and getting a number she did not expect. She turned her journal over to the investigator on Monday morning, all 11 years of it, unbroken, every line intact, exactly as she had always bragged. 52 of those lines had my name on them. I had signed 11, 12, if you count the one she stamped at my kitchen table on the 26th of July. Sloan came to the house the day before that, on Sunday the 9th, without him. She parked on the street instead of the driveway, which I noticed, and she stood on the step with her keys in both hands. "I'm not here to apologize," she said. "I don't think you want that." "I don't." "He told me you were his cousin." She laughed, one syllable, at herself. "He said you'd fallen on hard times, and he was letting you stay in the family house while he was on assignment. He said the kid was yours. He said—" She stopped and started over. "He said the kid had issues." Behind me the television was on with the captions running, and Ellis was lying on his stomach in front of it in his socks. "There's a closing packet with 2 signatures on it," I said. "One of them is mine and I didn't write it. Yours isn't on anything, and I want you to keep it that way, so listen to me carefully." I gave her a folder. Copies, not originals. The appraisal order with her name typed in the borrower's contact field, because he'd put her cell number on it. The withdrawn application letter. The number of the legal aid clinic on East Main, and the name of the woman there who does consumer fraud on Tuesdays. "You'll get a call from an investigator," I said. "Take the folder, tell them the truth, and tell them the date you found out." She started to cry then. 24 is very young. "Tonight," she looked past me at the back of my son's head. "Can I say sorry to him? I brought—" No. It came out flat, and it stayed flat. I have thought about that moment more than any of the other ones because it is the exact place where a person decides what kind of story they're going to be in. You didn't know, I said. That's true, and I'll say it under oath if it helps you, but you're not going to feel better in my living room. She nodded. She left the gift bag on the porch rail, and I threw it away without opening it, and that is the only thing I did in all of this that I am not sure was necessary. Dorothy called on the 10th at 7 in the morning. She said I had always been cold. She said I had trapped her son with a pregnancy and a house I hadn't earned. She said if I had ever once made that boy behave like a normal child, none of this would be happening, and that everyone at Grace Fellowship knew what I was. I let her finish. It cost me nothing and it took 4 minutes. Dorothy, I said, when she'd run out. In November of 2024, a wire went out for $41,000. It's line 11. Your name's on it. The pause on that phone call had a texture to it. That was a gift, she said. From whom? She hung up. 8 days later, she got a letter from a lawyer she had never met, on behalf of a guardian ad litem she had never met, on behalf of a 6-year-old she had never learned one word for. That afternoon, he stood on a hotel ballroom stage in Dublin and accepted a crystal wedge with his name laser-etched into the base. Top closer, Central Region. Somebody filmed it on a phone and put it on the company page, which is how I have watched it 6 times since. He holds the trophy up, he waits for the room, and then he says the thing that I think, if I am honest, is the reason I stopped being able to feel sorry for him at any point afterward. People ask how I do the numbers I do. He lets it sit. It's simple. I'm not carrying anybody. A man without dependents can move. 406 people clapped. On the 11th, a Tuesday, the magistrate did the second of the 3 things. The guardian ad litem had filed a preliminary report. The court entered an order compelling the resigning trustee's final accounting within 30 days, freezing every account associated with the trust, restricted and disbursement both, and setting a hearing for the 14th of August at 9. The order named the applicant. It required him to appear. I got served at work. On the 12th, at 3:15 in the afternoon, he drove to my Aunt Corinne's house. Corinne had Ellis that afternoon because I had a call with the audiology desk at 3, and my son does not need to watch my mouth while I have that kind of call. Grant had not asked where he was. He had not called. He had not been to that house in 4 months. He parked across the mouth of the driveway, which is a thing men do without thinking about it, and he told my 61-year-old aunt through the screen door that he was taking his son for ice cream. Corinne raised 3 boys and buried a husband and worked 29 years in the front office of a middle school, which means she has said no to more angry men than most attorneys. She said, "Not today, hun." He said the court hadn't ordered anything about visitation. She said that was true. She also said Ellis was asleep on the couch, which was not true, and that she'd be calling his mother now, which was, and she stood in the doorway while she dialed with the phone at her ear and the door not quite closed, which I have always thought was the single bravest thing anybody did that summer. He left. He sat in his truck at the end of the street for 11 minutes first. I did not drive over. I did not call him. I want to be clear that I wanted to, and that the wanting was physical. Instead, I emailed Alma Drager 4 sentences with a timestamp, and Corinne emailed her 3, and by 5 o'clock that afternoon, there was an entry in a guardian ad litem's file describing an unannounced attempt to remove a minor child from the home where he was being cared for that day by a party under investigation for converting that child's trust funds. He had made her case for her, in a driveway, in under 4 minutes, for free. He called me at 6:40 that evening, and I did what I had done every time since the 9th of July, which was to press the round red circle before I answered. "You need to withdraw whatever you filed." "I didn't file anything," I said. "You filed. I signed what you brought me." "Don't." His breathing was wrong. There was traffic behind him. "Imogen, I know you think you're being clever. There's a letter in that file from a physician about your mental state, and if you make me use it in front of a magistrate, I will, and then it won't be about money anymore. It'll be about custody. Is that what you want? You want somebody looking at whether you're stable enough to make medical decisions for him?" I looked out the window over the sink at my father's maple. "Say the last part again," I said. "What?" About the letter. Say it again. I didn't hear you. He said it again, slower. He was a salesman. He thought repetition was persuasion. That recording is 2 minutes and 9 seconds long. It went into the file box that night with everything else, and 8 days later, a prosecutor played it out loud in a room with a flag in the corner. On the 13th at 8:05 in the morning, I sent one email. I had waited on it for 27 days because order matters more than speed and because a document is only a weapon when the person receiving it already has a reason to read it. Now, there was a court order with a case number on it, and I attached that too. To the plan administrator at his employer, and copied to the third-party administrator that ran the assignment program, the notarized dependent waiver bearing a signature that was not mine, the full enrollment history showing Ellis Whitlock carried as a dependent from January 2020 through December 31st, 2024, and one line of my own. Please note that the enrollment record above is dated after the certifications your assignment file shows for the same period. That's all. I didn't editorialize. Somebody in a benefits office in Cleveland opened 2 files that had never been in the same room, and one of them said dependent, and the other one said no spouse or dependents in household 19 times, signed and dated. They walked him out at 4:15 that afternoon. A woman from HR carried a box to his truck. He was not allowed to take the trophy, company property. Somebody from HR lifted it off the shelf while he was still in the room, and somebody else photographed the ring of dust where it had sat for 3 days, which I think is the cruelest thing anybody in this story did that I had no part in. He came home at 9 that night for the first time in a week. He came in through the side door, the way he always did, and he stood in the kitchen, and he had aged. Imogen. He put both hands on the back of the chair he used to sit in. Okay, you won. Is that what? Okay, you won. I was at the table with the laptop, working. There is a rhythm to claims coding that survives almost anything. I need you to call them, he said. The bank, the court. You can unring this. Tell them it was a family misunderstanding. Tell them you gave me access. Tell them anything. They're talking about charges. They're talking about charges because you forged my signature. For him. His voice cracked open on the word. Everything I did for him. Who do you think has been paying for that clinic? Who kept his account current? You want to stand there and tell me I don't love my son? I closed the laptop. Here's the whole marriage and what happened next, so I'll give it to you in order. I put my hand flat on the file box on the chair beside me. I took out the November waiver and the enrollment history and the appraisal order with a stranger's cell number on it and the trip itinerary for 2, and I laid them side by side on the table, facing him, the way you lay out a hand you don't need to play well because it plays itself. Then I said the only 2 sentences I had prepared in advance. You didn't take money from me. You took it 31 times from a child who was standing next to you every single time. He looked at the papers. He didn't touch them. This is my house, he said quietly to the table. No, I said, it's my father's. I gave him the certified copy. Certificate of transfer, February 2019. One name, pencil in the margin. He read it twice. And I watched a man discover, at 36 years old, that the castle he had photographed himself in front of on the 4th of August had belonged to a dead carpenter and then to the woman he called a roommate the entire time, from the very first day he had carried a duffel bag through that side door. He sat down on the floor, not dramatically. His knees just stopped. Upstairs, a door opened. Small feet, then nothing. My son standing at the top of the stairs in the dark, where he had a clear line of sight to the kitchen, the way he had stood at the top of those stairs for 4 years, reading everything. I went up and turned him around and walked him back to bed. He signed one thing before I turned off the lamp. Does he have to come back? I told him I didn't know yet. That was the second lie I told my son, and it lasted 5 days. Franklin County Probate Court, Courtroom 4, the 14th of August, 9 in the morning. It is a smaller room than you're picturing. Fluorescent light, a flag, a magistrate named Okonkwo who has been doing minors' trusts for 19 years and who reads faster than anyone I have ever watched read. Alma, the guardian ad litem, had subpoenaed 3 things: the depository's records for both accounts, the notary journal of Bethany Whitlock Doss, and the letterhead evaluation attached to the petition. She went in order. 31 distributions from the restricted account between March 2024 and July 2026, each one released against what the bank had accepted as a certified copy of a probate court entry, stamped by a notary as a true copy of an original that had never existed. $196,400 into a personal account held solely by the applicant. The notary journal. 52 entries in my name over 3 years, of which I had appeared for 12. Bethany answered from the witness stand with her hands in her lap and said, "Yes," 9 times, in a voice you had to lean forward to hear. Then the letter. The physician who signed it had been contacted by Alma Drager's office on the 11th. He submitted a 1-paragraph statement. He had never met me, never examined me, and had signed the page at a golf outing in June because Grant told him it was for an insurance appeal. The magistrate took his glasses off for that one. "Mr. Whitlock, do you understand that this document was filed with this court?" Grant said he had been given bad advice. By whom? He didn't answer. Bethany was halfway back to her seat by then, and she stopped in the aisle and looked at her mother, and Dorothy looked at the floor, and something that had held that family together since before I met any of them came apart in the space of about 4 seconds. "Mom told me to stamp it," Bethany said, out loud, in a courtroom. "She said it was all one family's money." The magistrate denied the resignation petition. He removed the applicant's signer authority, effective immediately, referred the file to the county prosecutor's economic crimes unit, and directed that the trust remain frozen pending the accounting. Then he did the thing I had been counting on for 18 days. He set the restitution entry for hearing on Tuesday the 18th and directed that the trustee appear and be heard. Nothing was final that Friday. That is what a Friday in probate court is for. Then the third thing. He asked me to approach, and my lawyer put 1 page on the table. Not a speech, a page. An agreed judgment entry on restitution, with his written consent to move $155,400 out of his 401k and into the trust of Ellis Whitlock, a minor, by a qualified domestic relations order that a different court across the street would sign in September. The dissolution was filed that same afternoon in that same different court by a clerk who had no idea what she was stamping. Grant looked at it for a long time. "That's everything I have," he said. "It's everything he had," I said. I took the page with him. He did not sign it that day. He had 4 days to decide whether he wanted a magistrate to decide it for him, and that was the last conversation I ever had with my husband that was not answered under oath. On the 15th, the plan corrected my son's eligibility record administratively, an expedited correction, pending the Special Investigations Unit's review, retroactive to January 1st, 2025, because a waiver signed by a person who did not sign it is not a waiver. I sat in the driveway and read that email 4 times. Then I called Danielle at Surgical Financial Coordination, and she was so glad, genuinely glad, the way people in those jobs are, and then she went quiet while she looked at her screen. The September 15th room was still on hold until the 28th. To keep it, the authorization had to be resubmitted with a current audiological evaluation, current meaning within 90 days, plus the surgeon's re-review. The audiology booth had 1 opening before the deadline, Tuesday the 18th, 9 in the morning. The final hearing in Franklin County Probate Court was Tuesday the 18th at 9 in the morning, and the magistrate had ordered the trustee to appear, and the restitution entry and the visitation terms both waited on my testimony. If I wasn't there, it continued to the October docket, and the account stayed frozen until then, and the man who had emptied them stayed a co-parent with medical decision rights for another 9 weeks. The next opening in the booth after the 18th was the 3rd of September, 6 days after the room went back to the pool. I did the arithmetic out loud on the phone in my own kitchen, because I am careful about paper and careless about everything else. My son was at the table with his rock collection. I was 6, he was facing me. On the 16th, a Sunday, he brought me the blue case. He set it on the arm of the chair, and he climbed up next to me and he signed, and then he said part of it out loud too, the way he only ever did when he wanted to be certain, in a voice he could not hear himself make. Go to the court. I told him no. I told him the court would wait, that grown-ups make it wait, that I would call 12 people on Monday and somebody would move something. He shook his head. He had heard me call the 12 people. If you go to the ear place, he comes back. I wasn't wrong. He was 6 years old, and he was not wrong, and he had worked it out lying on his stomach in front of a television with the captions running, while the adults in his house believed they were speaking over his head. Then he signed the thing I will hear for the rest of my life, with his hands and with his mouth at the same time. I can wait. I already know what you sound like. I want to tell you I argued. I did argue for about 9 minutes. Then I went into the bathroom and ran the water and put a towel over my mouth, and when I came out I made grilled cheese, and we chose the 3rd of September on the calendar with a green marker, and neither of us said the word September again for a long time. Tuesday the 18th of August, 9 in the morning, courtroom 4. I wore the blue tie. There was no reason left to wear the blue tie, and he wore it. He had signed the consent page at 8:40 that morning, in the hallway, on his attorney's back. It changed nothing about what came next. His attorney made the argument you make when you have nothing, that the money went to household expenses, that the marriage was a partnership, that Mr. Whitlock had been under strain, that everything he did for his son. And Grant stood up when he wasn't supposed to and said it himself, to the room, with his hand flat on his chest. Everything I did was for that boy. The interpreter was standing at the rail because my son had asked to come and because I had decided, and I will defend this decision to anyone, that a child who had read every word of it from across a kitchen was entitled to be in the room for the last of it. Ellis let go of my hand. He walked up the aisle with a laminated card in his fist, 3 squares drawn in marker when he was 4, morning, afternoon, and the third one blank, because he had always liked to fill it in himself at dinner. He put it in his father's hand. Then he said, out loud, in the voice he uses when he wants to be certain, the sentence he had practiced with his speech therapist the day before, without telling me, "You don't have to come back." The interpreter signed it, and then, because that is her job, voiced it again for the record, clearly, to the whole room, to the magistrate, to the attorneys, to the second row, where a woman who had been subpoenaed over line 11 was waiting for her own name to be called, which is how a 68-year-old who had never learned one word of her grandson's language came to hear it twice. Nobody moved for a second. Then Magistrate Okonkwo signed the entry, and a deputy who had been standing by the door since 8:50 walked over and served a summons on Grant Whitlock in the well of the court, and it was 9:41 in the morning. Before he adjourned, the magistrate did one more thing. He said, on the record, that in 19 years he had never received a trust file in the condition of the one in front of him. Every receipt, every mileage log, 6 years of therapy invoices in date order in a file box, indexed by hand. Ms. York, he said, the loss in this case occurred through forged instruments and a false notarization. It did not occur through any failure of this trustee. The court wants that in the record. I had not cried once, not on the 9th of July, not in the bathroom on the 16th of August. I cried in a fluorescent-lit courtroom at 9:44 in the morning because a man in a robe read my paperwork and said out loud that I had been doing it right the whole time. 7 months later, Grant pleaded in February, forgery, aggravated theft, tampering with records, 18 months, with the restitution order running behind it, and his name on a public docket that anyone in Franklin County can pull up in about 9 seconds, which for him is the sentence and always will be. The 401k transferred in September. He gets supervised visitation twice a month at a center on Dublin Road. He has used it once. Bethany lost her commission in September and her job in October. She testified. She lives with her mother now, which the two of them appear to be experiencing as a punishment. Dorothy repaid $41,000 in 3 installments. The roof stayed on the house and the cruise photographs came down off the hallway wall. Grace Fellowship thanked her for her years on the hospitality committee. She has written my son 4 letters. He can't read cursive yet, and I have not offered. The physician who signed the letter surrendered his license under a consent agreement with the state medical board in January. He wrote me a letter as well. It was 2 paragraphs, which appears to be what he does. Sloan Marchetti moved to Cincinnati in the fall. She sent 1 card at Christmas with no return address that said he showed me a picture of a house and told me it was his. I'm sorry I believed the picture. The replacement processor for his right ear came on the 2nd of September, 8 business days after the eligibility record was corrected, for a copay of $60. Ellis had his second surgery on the 20th of January. Activation was the 10th of February. I'm not going to pretend it was the same. The surgeon told us, kindly and directly, that 4 extra months of silence in that ear at that age is not nothing, and that the left may never catch all the way up to the right. It hasn't. He goes to first grade with 1 ear that is very good and 1 ear that is learning late. He also came out of that booth on the 10th of February, turned around, found my mouth, and said, "It's loud in here," and then laughed out loud at a fluorescent light he could suddenly hear buzzing. The blue case is in his room with the dinosaur sticker on it. He keeps rocks in it now. In March, he filled in the 3rd square on the schedule. He drew a table with 3 chairs, and in the 3rd chair, he drew himself, and under it he wrote his name, the one the court gave him in November, York, the same as mine, the same as the man who framed the house in 1991 and wrote for Emmy in the margin. The maple leafed out 2 weeks ago. My father planted it the spring I turned 9, and it is the only thing on that street that everybody slows down for in October. I had the low limb over the driveway taken off in February, the one that had been leaning at the house since the ice storm, and I left the rest of it exactly where he put it. That's the end of it. I set a place at a table on the 9th of July, and it took 8 months for everyone to sit down where they belonged. I want to say one thing before I go, and it's not about him. For 6 years, I thought the dangerous thing was being lied to. It wasn't. The dangerous thing was that I had gotten so used to being described. The roommate, the cousin, the one who stretched thin, the one who needs him fixed, that I had stopped keeping my own account of who I was. The file box saved us. Not because it was clever, because for 6 years, when nobody was watching, I wrote down what was true. So that's my question for you, and I'd like a real answer, not a nice one. Where in your life have you let somebody else keep the record? Tell me in the comments. I read them. All of them, the long ones especially, and I don't skim. Thank you for staying to the end of this one. Go set the table for the people who actually live in your house. I'll see you next time.